Hello students, and welcome again to our Unit 3 of this module. In this presentation, we're going to talk about service learning. And you may remember from the diagram where we spoke about the various different views and theories of constructivism, service learning is one of the topics mentioned there. So we're now going to complete our circle of these various different topics. Well, let's start off by looking at the definition of service learning. Service learning, it says here, could be described as combining academic learning with personal and social development for learners and for students. It has been effectively engaged with in both schools and also at university level or higher education level. Now, according to the National Services Learning Academy, which has been cited in the Wolffolk textbook that I'm also been referring to, it says their service learning is the following. It is a teaching and learning strategy which integrates meaningful community service with instruction and reflection to enrich the learning experience, teach civic responsibility, and strengthen communities. Now, I've highlighted some of the words in color to make them stand out so we can actually unpack this definition and look a little more closely at what service learning is really supposed to be all about. So if we're going to use it as a teaching and learning strategy, then we're seeing it as part of our curriculum, as part of what we do in terms of our different subjects. It isn't purely something that would happen in, say, a subject like life orientation. It could involve various other subjects as well, like geography, even history. Lots of other subjects can involve some kind of community work, depending on what topic you're doing in that particular subject at the time. So it is a teaching and learning strategy, so it involves both the teacher and the learner. And what it does, in order to make it a meaningful community service, there has to be some form of instruction which would happen before one engages in the community service. It would also be instruction that's involved during the community service experience, and after the experience, one would involve perhaps some instruction, but most importantly, what has to happen is reflection. And it's a good idea to get learners to reflect as they are going through the experience and certainly after the experience as well. So keeping something like a log or keeping something like a journal where they can jot down their feelings, their ideas. Maybe there are worksheets that they complete during the activity or after the activity, but ultimately being engaged in these kinds of activities in a more teaching and learning kind of mode would enrich the learning experience. So it becomes really a meaningful kind of learning experience, and they understand the reasons why they're doing what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what the ultimate purpose is. So it also is going to teach them about civic responsibility. They're not just here as little islands on their own, but they actually are part of the community, and they play a role in serving the community as well. It's regarded as part of our civic responsibility as citizens of the country. And ultimately, of course, it is involved in strengthening communities, because one is working very often in service learning with lots of other communities. And so in the process, it is going to strengthen not only the communities you work in, but also you and your own community, which you might perhaps in the group, if you're doing this in a group, which one would assume you represent a particular sector of the community, whether it would be a group of grade 11s or whatever it may happen to be. We're going to look now at different types of service learning. So one could actually divide them into three types if you like. One would be direct service. So that might be involving tutoring. Perhaps one of your subjects at university involved mathematics, for example, and you might find that you would be helping out the neighbor's daughter or helping out a group of learners at the nearby school in terms of tutoring them in maths in the afternoons or something like that. You might work at an aftercare or homework center, even if it's for an hour a day. You might want to walk dogs for the SPCA. You might get involved in reading for children at underprivileged schools where the classes are large and you want to help out in that way. I know a lot of this is not happening at the moment, but it is something that one could do. One could get involved in serving meals for the poor, and there are certainly very many places one can get involved in that kind of activity. Volunteering for the Cancer Shave-a-thon, for example, and I'm not only talking about shaving your own hair or cutting your own hair as a donation, but I'm talking about when they have all those groups of young people at the shopping centers engaging in the shave-a-thon activities. That is volunteer work. They're not being paid to do that. They're doing that purely as a means of donating for cancer and caring about people who are affected by cancer. One could get involved in painting a classroom. One could get involved in painting school walls. One could do murals on walls. One could teach English to foreign learners, and I know of some people who've done a TEFL course who've been involved in teaching foreign learners in a school where there is a large foreign population perhaps. One could even get involved in decorating an old age home because people are so keen to help out in children's homes, but I often find that people don't always think about the care of the aged, and many of them are really very, very lonely and might need someone to just talk to. If one went there once a week to just talk to some of the elderly, or perhaps even got involved in decorating their lovely little lounge that they sit in and making it a more happy kind of place, tending to some plants there or whatever it may be. So these are some examples of direct service activities that one could be involved with in service learning. Then there are some more indirect service ideas, such as not being directly involved in the service, but certainly doing something for the community. And that could be collecting clothes for a children's home, not maybe going to the children's home and helping out, but collecting clothes for them, raising money for a particular cause. And I've noticed what a lot of people are doing now on Facebook is that instead of expecting, or it would be rather nice to have a birthday present, they decide that they want to support a particular cause, and they ask people to give donations to that cause in lieu of, giving them possibly a gift of some kind. So they can collect some money towards the cause that they have chosen, and that's their chosen idea for instead of their birthday gift. They could collect food for the poor, and there are very many food parcels one can make up, depending on which particular group of people you're working with, where you would collect tinned food and non-perishable items and things like that, and that could certainly be an indirect way of helping out in terms of service learning. And then also we mustn't forget advocacy, because one could get involved in designing and distributing posters on particular topics. One can do this around schools, one can do this in public places if we're allowed, that type of thing. One could design pamphlets, one could write articles, one could even design a logo. There are a lot of advocacy campaigns one can get involved with. Joining, for example, I'm a member of SADAG, which is the South African group that looks after children with learning needs and that kind of thing. And advocacy is one of the areas in which they're very involved in, for example, is to raise awareness of children who have special needs and those who also have learning needs, and they are very often not understood. So are there any examples that you can think of? If you think about what has been happening around the world recently, perhaps, or perhaps there's something that has been occurring in your particular community or your area. I don't know what examples you can think of, but it might be an idea to think about that for a moment and just jot one or two down on a piece of paper in front of you, and then we'll chat about a few more. Well, again, I know I haven't given you very much time, but I'm sure you'll think of a lot more as you consider this topic a little bit more deeply. But if we think about our South African kind of situation, I can remember recently, it might have been last year or a couple of months ago, where there was a very big storm off the KZN coast, and it brought up all sorts of litter onto the KZN beaches, and there were people going out in their multitudes, collecting literally all this rubbish and plastic that they could find on the beach, rescuing animals who'd been landed on the beach, or rather fish who'd landed up on the beach, and freeing them from all sorts of, I don't even want to think about what was stuck in these poor living beings, and putting them back into the sea. And I remember how involved the community got in that, certainly in the KZN area. I remember also reading about it in many places in the news about how those Australian fires devastated the forests recently and devastated the whole wooded areas, and how many koala bears suffered and other animals suffered, and how the local communities were just trying their best to help these animals who'd been affected by the fires. There were many who were obviously burned to death. There were many who were babies, moms that perhaps died, and babies that had survived, and they were being picked up and cared for by units of people who were volunteers to look after koalas and various buck and various other animals who were living in those areas. If we think about one of our very, very well-known community service providers in this country called the Gift of the Givers, they're involved in so many activities, not only in this country, but also overseas. And I know of many instances, for example, where there's been an earthquake or been some huge devastation in a country, they would just get together and people would donate, and they would send across to the communities that had been affected. And this is a wonderful community service to be involved in, because it's a nationwide one that anyone can be involved in, whoever you are and whatever area you're interested in, because it's all about helping other people who have experienced severe effects of some national disaster or something like that. And I'm also aware that there are many other activities as well, obviously, and many other community service activities. But speaking from more of my own experience, I want to share with you one of the community service activities that our third-year foundation fair students have been involved in over the years, is they get to organize a fun day for an underprivileged school. And what they do is the whole group of them, there could be, say, 120 of them or 80 of them, depending on how many students there are that year. They all get together, they're given one school, and they have to learn to work together to decide on how they're going to organize this fun day. So it's everything from organizing the equipment that would be used, the place where it would be held. Maybe there would be buses who would bring the children there because they don't have a playground. They would organize them t-shirts. They'd be printed that are different colors to represent different little houses, and they would compete against each other in various different fun activities, like jumping in a sack and rolling balls and various other activities that they'd be involved in. And they'd obviously organize them food and some form of replenishment during the day. And all of the students would be involved in the organizing as well as running things on the day itself. And it's a marvelous project that our third-year students have been involved in for years, actually, our foundation fair students, and I think it's such a great idea. And speaking from my own experience, when I last taught in an independent school a couple of years ago, the last school I taught at, where I was the life orientation teacher and the counselor there, I remember one year we organized for the students to each have a particular community project that they wanted to be involved in. And I think the one year our grade 10s got involved in the hospice, and they organized a special day where they had a special tea and they spoke to the people who were in the hospice, and the people there were, if they were able to, were brought into the little lounge area, and our learners at the school took absolute great delight in organizing them food and various activities and serving the people who were there and spending some time just sitting and talking to them. And that was a really, really great idea that we had. And the same year, I remember one of the other grades getting involved in collecting clothes and various items for a children's home in the same area as well. And actually going to the children's home, we were very fortunate that we were allowed to actually go into where all the students stayed. And I can remember one of the very sad places was they had erected a little garden for little learners little children who had died while they were there, and they had little plaques on the trees for them. And it was just so heartwarming to actually see the kinds of things that went on in this children's home. And then also on another personal note, I remember one year in this independent school, I got the whole school involved in a Bobby Bear project. But we decided, if you know about Bobby Bear, they're involved in helping children who have been usually sexually abused or very neglected or otherwise abused at home, and they land up at Bobby Bear Care Centre, which is in Amanzimtoti, just south of Durban. And we knew that we wouldn't be able to actually go there, and we would have loved to have gone there and worked with these children or done something for these children, but we thought we can help in other ways. So I literally got the whole school involved, and we had the younger grades making pictures of little bears that the children could color in. We had some of the older ones being involved in collecting items and everything from, little panty sets. And I can even remember one of the naughtiest boys in grade 10 carrying a huge big box of various sanitary items for girls. We had another father organizing his truck, and we packed everything into the truck to take it to Bobby Bear. And then we had a day for the two ladies who are most involved in Bobby Bear, a day to thank them for all the work that they do for Bobby Bear. And what we did was we had special readings and a poem that was read, and the students had taken a well-known song and changed the words, and they sang to them. And these ladies were brought to tears because they don't do it for the thanks they get, they do it out of their own hearts. And this was a day to actually thank them for what they did. They got big bunches of flowers, and it was really the most beautiful thing. And I landed up with a lovely certificate for the school, which I hung up in the school. And it was in fact hand painted by one of the ladies there. And I still have it because the school in fact closed down, and I still do have this, and it's a wonderful memory of what we did for Bobby Bear. So that's some examples from my own experience, and you might have certainly many that you've been involved with personally, or many that you have been involved with perhaps in a school that you might currently be teaching at. So let's talk now for a moment about what do the learners actually learn through these community service activities. Well, if you think about it, they are very likely to learn a sense of care and a sense of empathy, of trying to see things from another person's point of view. Their lifestyles or where they come from or their particular situation might be very, very different from that of the learners. And they would also be learning tolerance and a sense of inclusivity, which they may not have really experienced themselves if they only read about things but don't actually get personally involved in it. They could also feel a sense of competence and agency. So they realize that they can make a difference in terms of what they're contributing to a particular cause. And they can develop certain competencies along the way. And we can think of how many you would learn if you were involved perhaps in building a broken down or fallen down wall in a school. You might learn a lot about laying bricks and mixing cement and things like that, plastering the wall and painting the wall, etc., etc. They would also learn about commitment to a cause, because it's not just a once-off kind of thing. It's always useful if one can run a community project over a period of time, because then it has a lot more meaning for the learners. So they learn a commitment to this particular cause, and they also learn an awareness of social justice issues. And then lastly, they learn to critically reflect on themselves and on their role in society. So they're not, as I said earlier, thinking of themselves just in terms of their own personal worlds, but they actually see things from others' perspectives, and they see what an active role they can play in communities, either their own communities or communities outside of their own particular realm of experience. So I want you now to think of any community service activity that you may have been involved in, or perhaps you're involved in it at the moment, and how that has affected you in some way. And what I want you to do is I want you to reflect about this, and I'd like you just to jot down a few notes about this. This is something that you can do in your own time. You don't need to do it right now, because this is obviously a recording, but I'd like you to really reflect on this. So how this community service activity has affected you in any way. So you learn to critically reflect on your own experience. So lastly, we need to think about, well, we've learned about service learning, but what does this have to do with constructivism, which is what we've been talking about? Well, if you think about what the definition of constructivism is about, let me remind you, it's about constructing your own knowledge through active learning and through interaction with others. And if you consider that as your basic definition and bear that in mind, I want you to consider what this means in terms of service learning. So consider what we've spoken about here. Make some of your own notes on this. Perhaps you can do some reading around the topic, which would be useful as well. And what we'll do is we'll integrate this into our very last live lecture, which will be happening this week. So it's goodbye from me for the moment, and see you soon.